You ever just stop and wonder what's really going on inside your head? When you think or feel something, or even just decide to move your finger? Well, today we're going to go on this incredible journey. We're starting with the big picture, the brain itself, and then we're diving all the way down to the microscopic cells that make everything, and I mean everything, possible. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the big picture, your body's control system. Then, we're going to zoom way in to see the brain's tiny building blocks. After that, we'll meet the star of the show, the neuron, and you gotta meet its essential support crew. And finally, we'll piece it all together to see how they send signals at these just incredible speeds. All right, first up, your body's control system. We're talking from thoughts to actions. So let me ask you this. What controls, well, everything? Your every thought, every feeling, every single movement. I mean, think about it for a second. What single system is responsible for everything from remembering your favorite song to, just kicking a ball? Yep, you guessed it. It's this absolutely incredible organ right here, the brain. This, plus the spinal cord, makes up the very heart of your nervous system. Just look at it. You can see all the major parts, like the cerebrum, that's where all the thinking happens, and the cerebellum, which takes care of your balance. It's basically the central hub, the command center, for collecting information, figuring out what it means, and then sending out orders for absolutely everything you do. Okay, so this whole system is really split into two main parts. First, you've got the central nervous system, the CNS. That's the brain and spinal cord. Think of it as the command center. And then you've got the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This is like a massive network of network cables, all your nerves, that connect that command center to literally every single part of your body. And because this command center is so unbelievably important, it's like a fortress. It has 3 whole levels of protection. First, you've got solid bone, your skull and spinal column. Then, wrapped around that, there's a second level, 3 protective membranes called the meninges. And for the final layer, there's this amazing cushioning from the cerebral spinal fluid that it just floats in. Pretty well protected, right? Okay, so that's the big picture view. Now, let's do something cool. We're going to zoom way, way in and take a microscopic look at what this amazing tissue is actually made of. 90%. Just look at that number for a second. 90%. This is the vast, vast majority of cells inside your brain. But I'm willing to bet you'll be surprised to find out what they are, and maybe more surprised to find out what they aren't. So, what do you think makes up 90% of the cells in your brain? Come on, take a guess. If you said neurons, the famous cells that fire off all the signals, well, you'd be in good company. Most people would say that. But you'd also be wrong. And here it is, the big reveal. It turns out your nervous tissue is made of 2 main types of cells. Those famous neurons, the stars of the show that transmit all the electrical signals, they only make up about 10% of the cells. The other 90%, those are glial cells. Think of them as the essential and honestly totally overlooked support crew. They're the ones providing nutrition, protection, and all the support. All right, so even though they're outnumbered 9-to-1, neurons are still the fundamental units of the brain. They're the ones doing the heavy lifting when it comes to communication. So let's put them in the spotlight for a bit. So here it is, the classic neuron. The best way to think about it is like a tiny biological information processor, and it has 3 main parts you need to know. You've got the cell body, or soma, that's the control center. Then you see all these branching extensions. Those are the dendrites, and they receive signals. And then there's the single long cable, the axon, which sends signals out. Let's break each of those down. First step is the soma, or the cell body. This is basically the neuron's factory floor and its maid office, all in one. It's got the nucleus, the blueprint, and all the necessary machinery, like these little protein factories called Nissl bodies. They are just constantly churning out all the proteins the neuron needs to stay healthy and do its job. Okay, next up we have the dendrites, and their name actually comes from the Greek word for tree, and you can totally see why, right? They look just like branches. These branches are the receivers. They're just covered in thousands of little connection points called synapses, and that's where they pick up signals from all the other neurons. They're the input channels for the cell. And that brings us to the axon. If the dendrites are the receivers, the axon is the transmitter. It's this single, long biological wire that carries the nerve impulse away from the cell body so it can talk to the next cell. And get this is just amazing. Some axons in your body can be up to a meter long, a single cell. Now, don't think of the axon as just a simple static wire. Oh no, it's more like a super busy two-way highway. You've got outbound traffic, where nutrients and other materials are constantly being shipped from the cell body all the way down to the axon tip. And at the exact same time, you've got inbound traffic, with waste products being shipped back up to the cell body for recycling. And it's all happening along these tiny little protein tracks called microtubules. It's a constant flow of traffic. Okay, we've spent some good time with the star of the show, the neuron. But now, it's time to give some love to the real unsung heroes, the glial cells. Remember, these are the guys that make up a whopping 90% of your brain cells. They're the real MVPs. And it's not like they're all the same either. There's a whole cast of characters, each with a special job. Here you can see a few of the main types you'll find in the central nervous system. You've got these star-shaped ones called astrocytes, the oligodendrocytes with all their little arms, and the tiny ones, the microglia. So each of these glial cells has a super important job. The astrocytes, they're like the personal chefs, making sure the neurons get all their nutrients. The microglia are the security guards and the cleanup crew. They're the brain's own little immune system. And then you have these two, oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells. They do something absolutely critical. They wrap themselves around the neuron's axon to form this insulating layer called the myelin sheath. And trust me, this is the secret sauce for a fast-thinking brain, as we're about to see. And speaking of that myelin sheath, that brings us perfectly to our final section, how all these amazing parts actually work together to send a signal. Okay, so for a neuron to actually do its job, it all boils down to two key properties. First, it's got to have excitability. That's just the ability to respond to something, a stimulus, and turn it into an electrical nerve impulse. It has to get excited. And second, it needs conductivity. Once it's created that impulse, it has to be able to send it, to transmit it, all the way down its axon to the next cell. So the big question is, how does the brain send signals so incredibly fast? Well, this is where that myelin sheath we talked about becomes the hero of the story. Think about an uninsulated wire. It loses energy, it's inefficient. But this fatty myelin sheath wraps around the axon and insulates it almost perfectly. The electrical signal can't just leak out. Instead, it's forced to jump from one little gap in the insulation to the next. These gaps are called the nodes of Ranvier. And this jumping action, it's like a spark leaping across contacts, and it dramatically speeds up the signal. This is what allows for the lightning-fast communication your brain needs for everything. And that's, right there, is the foundation of everything your brain does. But it leaves us with this one truly profound question, doesn't it? How do these simple electrical signals, just jumping down billions of microscopic wires, how does that create the entire rich symphony of human consciousness? Our thoughts, our creativity, our love, our memories. How does all that come from this? Well, that is the great mystery, and maybe the true magic of the nervous system.